welcome to the Sales Scholars, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. Our goal is to bring some of the top academic research in the world of selling and deliver it here to you in practical, easy to apply methods that can improve your business. Well, we're excited to welcome to this episode of the Sales Scholars podcast, Dr. Shane Hunt. Now, Dr. Shane Hunt is the Dean of the College of Business and a marketing professor at Idaho State University. So, Shane, welcome to the show.
Oh, Craig, thank you so much for having me. It's a great program, and I enjoy watching it, and so happy to be on the program.
Oh man, no, we appreciate it. I know when you and I got a chance to first talk about coming on to the show, we got an opportunity to talk about different topics. I got a chance to learn a little bit more about you, so I think our listeners are really going to appreciate what we're going to talk about. So, well, look, Shane, I always like to start off the show with just getting a little bit of an understanding of how in the world people get into the academic space. So, man, what's your story about getting into academia?
Craig, that's a great question. So I'm a first generation college student. I was born and raised in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I had amazing parents. My dad was a mailman for the United States Postal Service for 32 years, and my mom ran a staffing service. And they sacrificed so much for me to be the first person in my family to go to college. So I went to University of Oklahoma. No great plan as to why I did that, other than it was 15 minutes from where my parents lived. That was the strategy, Craig, that I had. When I got there, I was, you kind of find your way as a major. I remember sitting there and thinking, I'm not sure what a major even really is. And I joked that the first semester I was a political science major, and my students sometimes ask me, say, "Oh, Dr. Hunt, were you thinking about going to law school?" Nope. The truth was, Craig, I was 18 years old, and I just had voted for the very first time. And when I left, the older lady that was gave me my "I voted" sticker. She said, "You are really good at this." And I thought, you know what, I am. I may be like a political science prodigy. So I did that for a semester. I'm like, no, I think I want to do business and then walk within business. And ultimately, I was very fortunate and blessed to choose marketing. So I was a marketing major at the University of Oklahoma, history minor. I had the chance to go straight through and get an MBA. So I went straight through and got an MBA also at OU. When I finished, the job market in the late 90s was very good, very robust. And I had the chance to go work for a Fortune 500 company based in Tulsa, the Williams Companies. I had a great experience there. I like to joke with marketing students. We talk about the four P's. I said I like to say I worked in all four of the P's. So my first job out of school was I was a pricing analyst, and then became a product manager and got into business development more on the sales side, and had a great experience.
I like it. Well, and it sounds like that you're able to leverage the business experience that you had in the company that you were working in and match that up against what you're learning in academia, and it seems like that just creates a lot of value, especially for students.
Oh, Craig, I love what you're doing with this podcast and with this show. And I think as academics, as business schools, we've got to focus more in the future on how do we take the knowledge and the research that we have and help businesses and sales managers and practitioners make better decisions. I think that's just essential. I will tell you that in my experience, so as dean, I teach an intro to marketing class each semester, and love doing that. And I will tell you, there is not a class that goes by that I don't interject something from my experiences in the private sector. And I think that's just critical. And so I think that is a really important part to helping students. And I love to share things that I did well or that we did well as a company. But I also love to share things that I messed up. I think sometimes we set unrealistic expectations for our students, and to hear us just talk about things at the level we are now or with the experience we have now. I can tell you, Craig, when I was early in my career, and even still today, I make mistakes, on a consistent basis. We all do. And,
Yeah.
and, and, and it's important that I want my students to learn from those mistakes, to learn from my mistakes,
Yeah.
and to help them as they develop into the business leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that they appreciate that. I mean, I know whenever you can share those things with students, it gives them insight. I also, I know I remind my students often that if you don't know how to do something, then that's called learning.
That's
It's like you're not going to know how to do everything right out of the gate. And so if the things you're trying are very complicated, they're cumbersome, you're not doing them well, that means that you're stepping into the learning phase, and let's see how we can improve it. So, yeah, those practitioner experiences I think are really valuable in the classroom. So,
They are.
well,
They
look,
are.
Shane, I know that you have done all kinds of research
Mhm.
over your years as being a professor. And one of the areas I know we had talked about early on in a conversation was in and around this space of sales management control systems.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I'm curious about, because I know a lot of sales managers are trying to navigate control systems in their own businesses, and especially in light of things that have happened as the world has shifted to virtual. So maybe let's talk a little bit about the ways that the shift to virtual has impacted some of the sales management control systems that are in place.
Craig, it's fascinating. When I was in getting my PhD at Oklahoma State, had the great privilege to work with Dr. Karen Flaherty, who's still a great professor at OSU. And she had done several things and some work and research in sales management control systems. And she was on my dissertation committee. I kind of got involved in it through that. And I've always been fascinated by how companies, how sales managers align the goals of the company with the salesperson's performance, right? I had a great sales executive tell me one time, he said, Jay, you get what you incentivize. And so, how do I align the goals of wanting to sell new products or more profitable products with companies? And when I first got to Arkansas State, I worked with my colleague and friend, Dr. John Mello, who ran the Center for Supply Chain Management there. And we did a lot of stuff on looking at these sales management control systems, right? It's the process control versus outcome control, and how do you do formal control, me as your manager versus informal control with your colleagues? Like, how do those things work? Except we took those sales management control systems and applied it to a logistics context, right? With transportation companies, truck drivers, how do you do that? And so there's been kind of several versions of that in my career that I've done research on. But possibly the most interesting is right now in the virtual world that we live in, Greg. So if you think about, sales management controls and you think about process control, that gets to things like a lot of people might be familiar. That's me saying, okay, I expect my sales rep to make X number of calls, to have this many visits, to do these things, that I'm going to focus on the processes. Whereas some sales managers may say, you figure out your own process. What I care about is that you hit your numbers at the end of the month, end of the quarter, whatever.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of work with companies and do sales trainings. And what I've been struck by, because I've asked this question over the 10 or 11 months since the pandemic began, and what I see is really both of those, people focusing on both of those. So I think that the process controls have really ramped up because of Zoom programs and technology that we have. I can listen in and see how you're selling, right? I can't go out with you on a call in Houston or Dallas or Tulsa. I can sit there on a Zoom call and see how you are doing. Now, that also provides some really great opportunities for coaching because we can go back and review that video, and it's now no longer a role play. It's not something we're doing in a sales training. I can go onto a Zoom meeting and say, okay, you're selling to Craig, and why did you say this at this point? Or this would have been a great opportunity to deal with this objection in a different way. And so I think that some of the technology that we have in those process controls, you can really provide coaching. Now, the thing that I also would say is there's been companies that I've talked to that some of their salespeople, especially their senior salespeople, kind of cringe at that, right? You're kind of looking over my shoulder. You're kind of trying to do things that maybe I don't feel comfortable. I've been successful. I've hit my numbers. But even in those cases, I think it's a great opportunity because even the best salespeople I know, Craig, are selling right now in an environment that none of them ever expected to sell in. Right?
Yeah.
The world as we know it, the sales that you and I and so many people, began our careers on, or even were doing 12 months ago, is totally different now. So I think that I've seen a lot of companies leverage those kind of process controls, the activity controls on there. The other thing that I think is a unique challenge for sales managers are some of the informal controls. And I've looked at informal controls at sales organizations of various industries. We've looked at them with logistics companies, ranging from FedEx to small businesses. And in all those cases, you see the power of informal controls, right? We see that in a business school. if you have a culture where teaching is important and it's incredibly important to us at Idaho State, then everybody understands and feels the importance to do a great job for our students, right? For the kids in the classes. And I think the same thing's true in sales. So if we have kind of an informal, hey, this is how we do things. Hey, the informal culture is we're going to exceed, we're going to work hard, we're going to challenge each other. I want to go to President's Club, I want to get those rewards. Some of those informal controls are more difficult in a world where we just don't see each other face to face. We can't do some of the things, we can't travel.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that I've really been impressed with sales organizations is companies that are leveraging these types of Zoomed calls, technologies to continue to build that culture and that informal control, even though we can't all be in the same place. And so I've seen some really neat things with sales managers who will do an early morning Friday morning meeting where they talk about some of the things and it helps provide that culture and celebrate successes. I've seen sales managers that are doing lunch and learns. They literally have food delivered to their sales team and they'll do the lunch and learns even though they can't do them in person. And I just think that I think culture matters always, and I think it's especially important in our current environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are I like those examples. One of the things that was curious about when because you talk about process controls in terms of kind of the formal structured ones that monitor process things, like I'm measuring number of calls or
Yep.
I'm measuring number of meetings held versus the informal ones. And is there any evidence one way or another that one is more important than the other?
So there's all kinds of stuff, and I would encourage. There was a great article published last year about different things and different studies that have shown. The honest part is, Craig, I can find you studies that show each of those are more important.
Okay.
I'll tell you one thing that I think is interesting that I would just say on that we found in a Journal of Business Logistics article we did a few years ago. We kind of found almost like an inverted U-shaped control output. So what basically happened was, if you don't have any controls, if I'm not managing my salespeople, I'm not getting maximum performance. Right? They're going to do whatever. You're going to worry about discipline or culture or whatever. And then as we saw things both on the process side, and the formal control side, and on the informal control side, you saw that go up and you kind of reached a point where you were getting maximum performance. Both when we looked at it as salespeople kind of self-reporting that, but also when we looked at company results, sales performance, right? Objective data. But what we also saw in that logistics context, talking to companies across North America, is we saw that inverted U where it went back down. So to a point, you can have too many controls.
I'm wondering, what do you find any commonalities amongst companies maybe that don't do that? Like, what are they missing?
Well, I think what you have, I think, Craig, we just watched the Super Bowl, right? And again, the Super Bowl was a great reminder of why I'm not a sports gambler because I would have missed the prediction this year. But but I think what they miss, Craig, and I use a sports analogy. I almost think it's a coach that goes to a team and says, I have a system in whatever sport it is. I have a system that works. I have a system that has won me championships. And I'm going to apply that system. And what you see in some cases is that system doesn't fit the talent there. It doesn't fit the culture in that organization. It doesn't fit. Maybe they've had that system was successful in college, but it's not successful in a professional league. And what I see is this too, and I'm amazed because it does sound intuitive, and it is intuitive. But yet, I've seen companies, everything from small companies to Fortune 1000 that come in and try to take a system and say, okay, I use this in another place, I use this in an industry. This is what I believe in. And so I don't. I think that's what's missing. I think sometimes um, our success becomes almost a challenge. I've seen companies. I use this expression. I love this expression. I talked to a company recently, and I said, you guys are letting good become the enemy or excuse me, letting great become the enemy of good. Right?
Yeah.
You're trying to come in and implement the system that doesn't fit, and so you're not able to move forward in any positive way. So I think that's there. And then the other thing that I would say, Craig, you and I as educators. So I work with our sales students here at Iowa State. I work with our marketing students. I would tell you that too, these things change as generations change.
Yeah.
And I would use the sports analogy. When I played basketball as a young person, and I don't play much now. I'm more of a 6'2" out of shape center now, Greg. But when I did play, I mean, we had coaches. It was kind of this yell and kind of command and control, and you see that in sales movies, right? Kids grow up watching Glengarry Glen Ross, and they think about what that is. I think the other thing is if you're going to coach kids today, my son was a very good high school basketball player. I don't think the kids respond to that same level of coaching. And I use that as an example because I don't think our students that we're producing and the great salespeople we're producing in universities, I think that the way they respond is different than maybe you and I in our generation did.
Yeah.
And so I think that people need to be reflective and say, how are we matching these control systems to the team we have and the team we're growing to get the best possible results?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, especially aligning to the talent. I think also I liked what you said about aligning to the culture. The other thing I think about too a lot of times is aligning to your customer base, because that can change over
Yep.
time as companies evolve their offering. And so, yeah, it sounds like the sales manager's answer is, look, have an adaptive system that you put into place.
I think that's huge. And that's a great point too that I left out was on your customer. I mean, you and I both know when we're out selling, customers have different needs. They have different ways they like doing business. They have different things and processes on their side, and so adapting to them ultimately to make them feel the best about the deals that we're closing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, as we're talking about this topic, it just, continues to play out that the shift to virtual certainly is affecting every aspect of selling. What are some of the best practices that you've seen in kind of this virtual selling strategy that have helped companies make the transition to this, for lack of a term, and I usually don't use this term, but I'm going to use it anyway, which is this new world.
Yeah.
I think it will be just the world. But I'm curious, Shane, if you've seen some best practices of companies who have made the transition well, what are they doing?
No, Craig, I have. I think the first thing is I think companies are very intentional about that and addressing that. I think one of the things that I've been surprised by, but I think is fascinating, is a lot of the companies that I work with, the salespeople that have struggled the most in this new virtual selling environment are their top performing salespeople and people who love going out and seeing clients and doing that and had a way of doing business were thrust into this. So one, I would say be intentional and don't assume that just because someone has experience that they're going to be good at what we're doing here in a virtual selling setting.
Yeah,
I think that some of the things that have been very very important for salespeople. One is very basic, but I think is critical. I think optics always matter in sales. The same way that we would talk about dressing the part when you go out and sell people, right? And when you're talking to people, optics matter in what you wear. I've been stunned at some of the sales meetings I've been on and the lack of professionalism in a virtual meeting, right?
yeah,
And I joke with students all the time. I said, you can have sweatpants on and flip flops and whatever you want that I can't see in the Zoom screen. But in the Zoom screen, you've got to look professional like you would in any other sales setting. And so I think companies that have stressed that have helped that. I think backgrounds matter. I think spaces matter. I think backgrounds are something that companies talk about. You talk about all of the different ways we can get distracted in a virtual selling environment. One is backgrounds, right? So have a background that fits your company, whether that's some type of digital imagery or something in a home office. But that is a critical thing that you see. I also think salespeople, one of the best practices at finding additional ways to keep people engaged. So you and I both know, and we talk to students about the challenge of keeping people engaged when we're selling to them, Craig, at an office in Houston or Boise or wherever. But it's even more pronounced now because think about all the distractions I have right now. So I'm sitting in my home office. I could be distracted. We have people with home learners. Kids are there. My wife and I have a son who's a college freshman, but we have a daughter that's an eighth grader who has a couple of days every week that's virtual or has for a few months. And so all of the different distractions. So how do I keep you engaged so I don't look off or I don't get distracted? So I think that questions have become more important. I think that utilizing technology in a favorable, positive way. I think you have to be very careful. Don't try to start sharing things if you don't know how to share them. I've been on a few of those calls. And like, well, that doesn't work. Well, that doesn't make me as a customer feel very good.
Yeah.
So be very confident, but also don't lose sight of the fact that in a virtual selling environment, so I might be sharing my screen and showing you PowerPoints. Make time to have conversations. Make time to do what you and I are doing. I'm looking at your eyes. So we're making eye contact right now, Craig, even though we are 1,000 miles apart. And so having those opportunities to make sure you build in opportunities to have conversations and develop relationships and build a bond and a trust still has to be there, even if we're not in the same room.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's funny. I saw a headline to an article the other day, and it talked about, in your video meetings, turn off your camera. And what I thought to myself, in a sales world, if I'm leading a sales team, I would tell my team the opposite. I
Yep.
would be like, look, if you can't sit across from them physically, then video is the next best option to be able to look at somebody, because in sales you're listening to what people are saying, but you're also watching what they're saying through their
Yeah.
nonverbals. And that's such an important part of the communication process. So it sounds like a lot of those best practices that you're seeing, as I listen to them, it's like, hey, these are fundamental communication principles, but the shift to virtual has turned a lot of them upside down and confused people on, hey, exactly what does this look like in a virtual world?
And I like what you said earlier, Craig. I don't think it's the new world. I think it's just the world, right?
Yeah.
It's just selling. And I think going forward, there will be clients that want us when we're past the pandemic that will want us to come and sell in person, and we're going to teach those skills. But I think there's going to be a lot of clients that like this from the buy side, and I think so. We're going to have to continue to help and evolve student skills and salesperson skills in this area as well.
Yeah. No, that's I agree with you. And I think that's some great best practices. I mean, I know, as you and I have talked, even prior to this conversation, covering this topic of sales, the expansion of sales programs in universities and the way that organizations can work with sales programs. I mean, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for both, the programs at universities, but also for organizations, who, so many of them, sales kind of makes the organization go round.
Yeah.
I don't want to suggest, if any non-selling people are listening, that everybody isn't important. Everybody does their part. It's kind of like a rowboat. Everybody better be rowing, but sales a lot of times makes the organization go. And so one of the things I'm curious about is, just from your seat, how can organizations, you think, get involved with universities so that they can create value for everybody?
Yeah, so I think Craig, absolutely, and we've got all kinds of incredible business majors here at Idaho State, and every other ACSB school does as well. But I'm also kind of a fundamental believer as you that nothing really starts until people are making sales, right? Unless there's revenue coming in the door.
Yeah.
So I would say that on two levels. One, I would say every company that I talk to, every sales manager or sales executive says to me every time I speak with them, if you've got a great young salesperson, please send her or him to me, right? Send
I've
them
heard
to
it too.
us.
I've heard it too.
You hear any of us that are please, if you've got a great salesperson, young salesperson, please let us know. We want to come interview them, let them be an intern. We want to hire them. So I would take from that, Craig, that whether it's Idaho or Texas or any other state, I would take the fact that generally we don't have enough great salespeople in the pipeline. And if we're going to have the growth that we want in our economy in the next decade or the next generation, we've got to do a better job of that. So, what I would encourage practitioners to do, sales managers to do, especially those of you that live in a university town or near a university, is to reach out to the dean of the business school, to reach out to the department chair, to reach out to the professor who teaches sales, and ask them and say, we'd love to be partners. Um, I think that sales education, I think what you guys have done at the University of Houston is one of the best things at any business school in North America, and how you've prepared your students and what you're doing. And so when I got here, one of the things that I wanted to do, I built a USCA sales program when I was first dean at Arkansas State. And we want to do the same thing here because what I know is the sales students that we get, there's 100% job placement.
Yeah,
So by practitioners reaching out, it can encourage deans that maybe aren't, deans can be any disciplined professor. It might encourage people that aren't from a marketing and sales background to say, hey, this is something where it's there. And then I would encourage you to step up and say, I'll partner with you. Let me come in and guest lecture to your sales class. Let me help develop role plays for your students. Let me give money for sales scholarships. We just announced new sales scholarships here from some individuals did a new scholarship. We had Aflac as a corporate sponsor did a new sales scholarship. And so step in ways to do that. But then we provide them with opportunities to help our sales students develop, which creates their pipeline. And
yeah,
so I would just be very proactive about this. I think it is something that is vastly underutilized at universities. I think schools like Houston and Florida State and a number of schools are doing great things, but I think we need more schools doing that. I mean, we've launched a sales certificate program here for our undergraduates immediately. And that's the other thing. The second part that I was going to say is the reason we started with a certificate, so it's a 9-hour sales certificate where they take professional selling, take an advanced sales class. All of our students sell. And so they do real sales things with companies. That takes practitioner help, right? There has to be companies that come along and say, yeah, we'll let your folks work with us. We'll let them sell real things because the thing where practitioners can get that they can help with. The one thing as a professor, as a dean, that I can't simulate is rejection, right? Because
yeah,
at the end of the day, every one of my students know I care about them. I want them to be successful. I can't simulate what you and I've experienced, Craig, going up to a customer and saying, hey, I just finished my sales pitch. What do you think? And them saying, Shane, I could not be less interested. Or saying something a lot worse than that.
yeah,
And that's important. And we want them out of state. We want them to have those experiences while they're in school so that when they go work for a company after they graduate, they're not intimidated by that or as intimidated by that. And so companies can find lots of different ways to partner. But even some of these in high tech or engineering or the sciences, reach out to your business school, talk to them because I think it's something that can be beneficial for everyone involved.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think you make some great points around the ways to get engaged and then especially where the value comes from. Yes, it's valuable for sales programs and students, but because I think it's sales,
Yeah.
it can instantly create good value for organizations. So I think that, I've yet to come across a sales program who has said to me, yeah, you know what, we don't really have any room to get connected with practitioners or operators. And then at the same time, what you mentioned, I've come across companies all the time, and I mentioned sales program, and they're like, "Oh, do you have good salespeople? Any good?" It's the same thing that you heard. So I think there's tremendous opportunity in that. So, well, Shane, look, we are out of time, but I just want to tell you how much we appreciate it. I think we covered some great topics that our listeners are really going to like. So, thank you for joining the show.
Oh, Craig, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing with this program. It provides great insights. I love looking and I look forward to watching them every time. Thank you for having me
Awesome.
on.